Hi. We have Professor David Kilpatrick here tonight at Mercy University. Since we started a bit late, I'll keep my introductions even shorter than I normally do. I met David a few years ago. I found him extremely interesting because he had a take on the organisation of North American soccer like I'd never heard from a North American. He's the official historian, I think, of the New York Cosmos. And, he almost, it was very, very innovative the whole way he looks at it. So he was good enough to come here 2 years ago, just after COVID, to expand on his views. And then we reconnected again recently. What I've asked him to do is he's going to give an overview of the current state of US soccer, but particularly asked him to talk about this whole promotion and relegation issue. Because actually, although the classic North American model is characterized by closed leagues, there's a bit of activity and thinking in the States about maybe looking at the promotion relegation. David, it's great to have you here as always. Floor is yours. Thanks for your patience, but we're rolling.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Great to be back at Birkbeck. Sean, thank you so very, very much. I just want to say a couple of thank yous. Dr. Lisa Coppola is in the audience. Dr. Tom McCabe is in the audience. Vic Wright from the Arsenal Football Club is in the audience. I'm here in the audience. So really good to see some familiar faces. And again, it's great to be back at Birkbeck. So I want to be clear about one thing. Right off the bat, as we talk about the state of soccer in the States, I'm giving a very partisan perspective here, right? I'm not trying to be objective or neutral. As Dr. Coppola likes to say, positionality determines epistemology. So I want to make it clear the position that I'm coming from. And that is first and foremost someone who's a New Yorker who's grown up with sport. So to talk about the state of the States, this is an image from last week. I don't know if you saw this, the president and Mr. Trump and one of Elon's children. But this is the Oval Office. And if you've seen any events from the Oval Office in the past couple of weeks, you'll notice this replica of the FIFA World Cup. If you've been to the FIFA Museum in Zurich, you can get this for like 12 euros, I think. But I'm guessing he may think it's the real thing. I don't know. But it's right behind his right shoulder on all the press conferences in the Oval Office. It isn't that Mr. Trump is ignorant of football, by the way. He was an excellent soccer player and baseball player at New York Military Academy, where he went to high school. So he did play soccer himself in the 1960s, despite somehow having flat feet the year he graduated and wasn't able to serve in Vietnam. But he was a good footballer. And his youngest son was in the DC United Academy, although not deserving. I don't know. He's not playing professional. I don't know. Barron is not playing at NYU right now. But so in other words, the state of the States, soccer has an important place to play in. For what might be rather obvious reasons, next year the FIFA Men's World Cup will be in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Maybe by then we won't need to say that if Mr. Trump has his way in the provinces of Canada become the 51st state. I don't know. And if Mexico doesn't build the wall, and I don't know exactly how that will affect things, but obviously it's all in the mix. But this summer, of course, the Club World Cup is on. So already FIFA's upping its engagement with the United States. They have opened up offices in Miami. First time they've opened anything up since Zurich. At full disclosure, I'm consulting with FIFA on a museum in Miami there. So a lot of attention. Just this weekend, the last 2 days was the opening weekend of Major League Soccer's 30th season. So in terms of soccer in the United States, right? Soccer, every few years, this report is done, and soccer is ranked as the fourth most popular spectator sport in the United States. And again, I just want to be clear here in terms of my use of the word soccer. It is an Oxbridge term. Please don't blame me for it. It's really just so that there's no disambiguation. When the Pilgrims Tour came over in 1911? 1905, yeah, that's right. That was when the term first showed up. But in the papers before that, it was the kicking code, the dribbling game, or the association code, these different terms it was used by. So we did invent it, so please don't blame us. But it is not the most popular code of football there, of course, but 5% of Americans right now, according to these Gallup polls, place the beautiful game as their favorite sport to watch. Here's a really interesting trend, I think, in terms of these Gallup polls. You'll notice that soccer didn't even rate when the polls first came out. Obviously, the 1966 World Cup had a huge impact, and professional leagues started back up in 68. It wasn't until 1981, 4 years after Pelé's retirement, that soccer started to show up at 2% of Americans started to identify the game as its favorite. And for a little bit here, it went up from 3 to 4% in 2013, all the way up to spiking to 7% in 2017, and now down to 5% in terms of these polls. So, and you can see by age group something I think really interesting. That really coveted marketing demographic of 18 to 29-year-olds, soccer is the third most popular, 8% of kids in that age group. And for my age group, Pelé's generation, we like to think of ourselves, it's the third most popular. So, but again, that in between, and so it's kind of an interesting thing, I think, in terms of how those times age out. Now, that's in terms of spectator sports. As participation, right now, there's more than 1 million children in America, or excuse me, more than 2 million children, right? 2,152,000 play, and that's 7.6%, which is actually a drop. Like we're seeing a drop in participation rates at the youth level in the United States. So as you can see, from 2013 to 2023, right? It's gone from 9.3% of children to 7.6. That's a pretty significant drop in participation. So while we like to hear about soccer as an emerging sport, right? Soccer has been here, right? The very first football with an inflated vulcanized rubber bladder was invented by Charles Goodyear and sold at his shop, his brother-in-law's shop in Lower Manhattan, prior to codification. So football's been played, especially once the Association Code started in 1863. We were right in the middle of the Civil War, but the laws of the FA were published in New York newspapers during the war. And in 1866, Beadle Brothers would sell it as a dime book on the streets in New York. So if you wanted to play the Association Code or the Rugby Code, the laws of the game were rather accessible as far back to the 1860s. Now, this is an image of where the World Cup final will be at MetLife Stadium, right? And the final will be on the 19th of July, 2026. So perhaps the highest concentration of consciousness in the history of humanity will be on this spot, on this day, next summer. Right? More human beings will be watching this ball and those 22 players than anything else in the history of our species. And it'll be on that pitch. This is the largest crowd in the history of that space. That was in the 22nd of July, 2023. Anybody want to guess what teams they are that are playing there that drew the biggest crowd in the history of it? That's Arsenal and Manchester United. That's Arsenal versus Manchester United. Now, 2 weeks later, or sorry, not even 2 weeks later, 12 nights and 9 miles apart. 12 nights and 9 miles apart. Anybody want to guess who these two teams are? NYCFC and Red Bull New York. Local derby, Hudson River Derby. That crowd drew an announced 11,000. If you think that's 11,000, I also have a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you. And because football is not just about men, this is a crowd 2 nights later, 3 nights later, for the women's professional league, NWSL. This is Gotham against North Carolina Courage. This was an announced crowd of 3,000 for. Again, were 3,000 people really there? It looks more like 300. So again, we can't really verify those attendance numbers, but this is to give you just a sense of what crowds are like. So the question I'm raising right now is why? why would Arsenal versus Manchester United be the largest crowd in the history of New York Metro Region soccer? And why would something as supposedly meaningful as a Hudson River Derby, and in terms of the women's football, the local team Gotham went on to win the championship that season. So it wasn't like they were in poor form. On the contrary, right? But these are the kinds of crowds that are being drawn for matches that should be meaningful, but a supposedly meaningless friendly between Arsenal and Manchester United draws that kind of a crowd. So in terms of what we understand with meaning in matches, it makes me think about the show Ted Lasso in this particular scene. Now, again, the shtick or the initial premise of the show, Ted Lasso, is the fish out of water, the American who's ignorant of the beautiful game and so forth. But at one point in time, as he has a team meeting, players ask, Coach, do they not have relegation in America? Oh, no, no, no. So what happens to all the shit teams at the end of the season? They play out the rest of the schedule, going through the motions in meaningless games contested in lifeless, half-empty stadiums, and everyone's pretty much fine with that. That sound about right, Coach? Yeah, it's dumb. So that kind of sums it up. But here's the landscape of top-flight soccer in the United States right now, with Major League Soccer, the NWSL, the new women's professional league called USL Super League. And this gives you a little bit of the kind of distribution across the country. So there's a lot of space in the 50 states between where these franchises are located. This is how MLS likes to describe the ecosystem in North America. The top division, MLS, established in 1996. Those are the MLS first teams. MLS Next Pro is right now in the third division. It launched in 2022. These are the reserve teams and some independent pro clubs. MLS Next is their youth academies. So this is what Major League Soccer looks like in terms of its 30 franchises now, with San Diego being the 30th. And here you can see how the valuations here, the number of clubs, the number of clubs have gone up from 10 in 1996 to the current level of 30. And in terms of the cost of those fees, it cost $5 million for the initial investor groups in 1996 to enter the league. It is now 500 million, right? So it was 5 million to enter Major League Soccer right after the World Cup in 1994. San Diego just paid 500 million for their expansion fee, right? You have to pay an expansion fee to be a member of the league, right? So it isn't, you don't earn your way up. You could be playing in the third division and finish at the bottom of the table, but if you pay the right fee and you're in the right location, you have the right ownership group, you can go right in, right? Or maybe you haven't even played before. If you've got the 500 million and you have the right location and the right ownership group, you might go in right to the top flight right away. This is what's MLS Next Pro, which is the third division. MLS considers this a developmental league, not a commercial league. So it's kind of an interesting distinction. The idea of a developmental league as opposed to a commercial league. In other words, they're not really trying to generate revenue with this in terms of attendance or media coverage or anything of that nature. They're really just looking to develop talent to either fill their first squads or to sell outside. Challenge to this, and we'll talk about this at the very end. This is a new thing that just came out a week ago, and that's the thing. When I agreed to talk here a little while ago, I thought this is going to be so easy because this is something I'm talking about all the time. The last 2 weeks have thrown this entire topic topsy-turvy. But this is a kind of a rival, if you will. I mentioned this women's league that's now a rival to NWSL. That's also a first division league. And there's different requirements for women's first division leagues. USL has a kind of a pre-professional one. They've got League Two. Right now, this is USL's championship, which is at the second level. Tom McCabe's son, Tom McCabe, was the starting central midfielder for the Orange County won in 2021. 2021, they won the USL championship. There was no promotion to first division. So this is what the distribution of USL Championship looks like on the map. This is the division below that, which would be third division. And this is what the NWSL looks like. And this is what the women's USL Super League looks like. Now, missing from all that landscape, you see Tom's wearing a brand new Admiral Cosmos shirt. Missing in that is the team that I grew up loving, and the team that I have been involved with since November 2012 officially as the club historian. So again, when I said that my perspective is partisan, I mean it very much as somebody who grew up as a fan of the Cosmos and then became very much involved in operations for the club since 2012. If you don't know who the Cosmos are, my students don't know who the Cosmos are. Most of them, at least, rarely do, right? But you might have heard of this guy, Pelé. You might have heard of that guy, Giorgio Canali. You might have heard of this guy, Franz Beckenbauer, Carlos Alberto, Johan Cruyff, who played for us twice. He played once at Giant Stadium against the FIFA World All-Stars in 1978. Played once at Stamford Bridge versus Chelsea, but then ended up going to LA Aztecs and Washington Diplomats. But some of the greatest players of what I would argue is the greatest generation of footballers wore the Cosmos shirt. So they were the first Galacticos. This is October 1st, 1977, Pelé's last match as a professional footballer. This was a friendly with Santos. He played for Cosmos in the first half, Santos in the second half. He scored for Cosmos in the first half. That was his last goal as a professional. And the Cosmos were very, very popular when I was a kid. From 1977 to 1981, 70 consecutive home league games of 30,000 plus. Tom probably attended many more than I was able to. But these were not unusual crowds at Giant Stadium. This is next door to what MetLife is. So in the New Jersey Meadowlands, easy to kick a ball from where that is. Right, it's just a penalty kick away. It's about 12 yards away, right next to it, and we saw it in construction. The World Cup in 1994, though, was the reason for the launch of MLS, right? So the Cosmos had this stream through 1981, but 1984 was the last year of the North American Soccer League. So the Cosmos as a club didn't shut down completely, but they stopped fielding a first team. So there was the protection of intellectual property rights. There was the running of soccer camps so that your intellectual property rights don't slip into the public domain. You have to be exercising them. Ergo, the Admiral shirt that Tom is wearing right now, which is not to generate revenue. It's merely just to keep asserting the club's existence. But in 1994, as a condition of hosting the World Cup, FIFA mandated a new first division in the United States. And there were a few different rival groups, but Major League Soccer had a major inside track. And despite launching, they could have launched the year after the World Cup, would have been ideal because there was a Major League Baseball strike, but they waited until 1996. They wanted to start with 12 franchises. Instead, they started with 10. But by 2012, Sepp Blatter was criticizing it as not being culturally relevant, which obviously wasn't exactly music to the ears of soccer executives in the United States, but it's really quite apt. I would say this as two different anecdotes. A couple of years ago, when NYCFC won Major League Soccer, a few weeks later, when the spring semester started back up again, I had two different classes. I had a sport literature class on the Tuesday morning, and I had a Foundations of Sport Management class Tuesday afternoon. And I asked those room full of students in both of their sporting society, sorry, was the class then. I asked them, who's the defending champion of Major League Soccer? In two classes, right, about 40 students, only one student in either class was able to knew who the MLS champion was. And that was because she was dating one of the players. Right? None of the rest of the students knew that the champions were playing 12 minutes down the road at Yankee Stadium, or a few 3 train stops down the railway on the Hudson River line from campus. So in terms of cultural relevance, no ticker tape parade, no massive celebration of New Yorkers, relatively culturally irrelevant. So there's a lot of truth to what Blatter was saying. In 2013, Sunil Gulati then the president of the United States Soccer Federation. And he was also an executive of Major League Soccer in various capacities and also with Craft Soccer. So he was the chief executive of the New England Revolution. He made it to the executive committee of FIFA, right, which is the highest level of governance. And as he confessed, if you will, to the New York Times, his presence on the executive committee is no small development for a country that has problems related to its unprofessional league. Major League Soccer does not have a promotion relegation system, unlike most of the rest of the world. And it does not play its season in the traditional international window. Having FIFA's approval for these idiosyncrasies, Gulati noted, is important, right? So the deviation from FIFA's sporting integrity mandate to have promotion and relegation, so that where you play in the table, right, first, second, third divisions, that's based not on business models but on sporting merit, is something that we have, you might say, is the ultimate American sporting exception. That same year, the New York Cosmos returned to play, right, for the first season since 1984. And again, I was part of the club then, and you can see the stated mission was to restore the legacy of the club in a renewed sense of passion and vitality, right? So the Cosmos were back, and they were playing in a revived North American Soccer League. So there was legal continuity between the Cosmos of the 70s and 80s to when the Cosmos came back in 2013. So it wasn't a second iteration. If you see that in Wikipedia, all I can say is there are people that are paid to keep updating these Wikipedia pages, and that's really, really obvious as you see things being changed, right? So there's bias in those presumably neutral things, right? So the Cosmos were one continuous legacy, not only intellectual property-wise, but even in terms of the trophies, jerseys, so many material cultural items. But the North American Soccer League Mach 2 was not legally the same as the other league, right? So it was a new league, and I won't get into the full complications of how that came through. But in 2013, right, the Cosmos joined this revived league with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 franchises. As you can see, one was in Canada, the rest around the United States. And a dream come true for me, the Cosmos came back. Quite literally a dream come true. And full disclosure, there's my daughter down there, working as a mascot, and my son is a ball boy somewhere over there. But this was a tremendous day when the Cosmos finally got back on the pitch. And it was a fairy tale season, which ended with a title in November 9th against Atlanta. The team won. The next year, Cosmos faced Red Bull New York, the only other professional team in New York at the time, right? The local major league franchise, and we beat them in something that's our equivalent of the FA Cup, right? The Open Cup, and we defeated Red Bull on that night. The year after that, Major League Soccer commissioner, and he's also the executive of Soccer United Marketing. I won't go too deep into the woods about that. I'm sure some of you know about that. Others may not too much, but I don't want to get too off into that. But Garber made this threat of everyone needing to align with the vision that's been established. Right? So this is very much about preserving hegemony. Right? Cosmos faced the new New York franchise, NYCFC, which is part of City Football Group with a minority partnership with the New York Yankees baseball team on the 17th of June, 2015, and Cosmos won that game as well. So in facing the two local MLS franchises, Cosmos won. Why? Because we were built to. We were built to reclaim that. So we had Raul, we had Marcus Sena, we had a number of top players and a budget to match MLS to try to compete. The goal was, since we couldn't get promotion to first division, right, in the current system, we at least wanted to try to win the Open Cup, which would qualify us for Champions League, the CONCACAF Champions League, with the ultimate route to trying to get to the Club World Cup. That was our goal, to get back to be the best in the world with the system that was in place. So again, we won the championship in 2013, obviously no promotion to first division. 2015, we hosted it. You can see these great crowds that we were getting at the same stadium where we had first played in 1971. That was just a kind of a stopgap measure until we could build our own stadium. And the NASL was growing gone from 8 to 12 by 2016. But by the 2016 final, a lot had changed. You can see how small this crowd is for the final. It was an embarrassingly small venue. We did sell it out, but we had problems with the venue and a number of other issues that were happening in 20 that had happened through that year of 2016. And so in the immediate aftermath, it looked like the Cosmos would shut down operations, just fold. But Rocco Commisso, who owns MediaCom, he's a multi-billionaire media mogul, saved the club at the 11th hour. And he's now also the owner of AFC Fiorentina. So as you can see here, we were a fax away from destruction, and probably the strongest bid to buy the Cosmos, other than Rocco's bid, was from Soccer United Marketing, or actually Major League Soccer itself. As you can see here, they offered to buy for $5 million to buy us out. And the next year, this is how the NASL had reduced again, right? So we've gone from 8 to 12 and then back down to 8 again. In 2017, Cosmos were playing at Coney Island. If you're Lou Reed fans, they know the song Coney Island Baby. Again, getting decent crowds at Coney Island, right on the ocean. And then a series of antitrust, a series of litigations happened. And this Article 19 from FIFA on the sporting integrity, the principle of promotion relegation. Within the Cosmos, we were talking about this from 2012 on, right? That we wanted a system of promotion relegation. And we had our second division sanction as a league revoked. Right? And at the same time, USL had it went from third division to second division. So more on that a little bit. There were two other very interesting court cases at the time. This went to the Court for Arbitration of Sport. The Kingston Stockade and Miami FC sued United States Soccer Federation and lost in the Court of Arbitration for Sport. The CAS decided that CONCACAF and its member federations could decide how to apply FIFA statutes as they saw fit, which didn't seem to make much sense, but that was it. And there's a Columbus Crew jersey in the crowd. The state of Ohio tried to block Columbus Crew from moving to Austin, Texas. Again, one of the things of the closed leagues where there's no promotion or relegation is the idea of franchise scarcity, right? There's only so many franchises. And so with franchise scarcity, the only way a city can get a team is if it takes a team from another city or if you expand. It's the only way. And so Austin, Texas, right, the owner of Columbus, operator, investor of the Columbus Crew franchise wanted to move them to Austin, Texas. The state of Ohio tried to sue it. Major League Soccer avoided a major public relations disaster and a legal battle with that by simply allowing him to move to Austin, but keeping the IP in Columbus, and a new ownership group took over, essentially an expansion franchise. Again, I don't know, since you're wearing a Crew jersey, right? So in a way, there's continuity of the franchise in terms of its IP, but technically the franchise relocated to Austin and a new one came in its place with a new ownership group. Since you're wearing the jersey, would you say that's a fair way to describe it?
Yeah, a lot of people had the Save the Crew campaign.
Yeah.
It was all over like Columbus.
Yes, hashtag Save the Crew was something at Cosmos we were all embracing. We were all posting that a lot because we saw kind of a shared sense of what was going on with the fans in Ohio. So by 2018, then with the second division status revoked from the entire league, our first team suspended operations. We put together essentially our reserve team was playing in something called the NPSL. And you see here, we were actually playing the Kingston Stockade. And here's Rocco Commisso, the owner of the Cosmos, with a Kingston Stockade chairman, Dennis Crowley. So both fighting very aggressively, especially in the media and even on social media through burner accounts, right? Advocating pro-rel for USA, advocating for promotion relegation, for sporting integrity to replace the franchise scarcity model that we had. And the other owners, the owners of Miami FC, we faced them with our reserve team in the NPSL championship final, but that was not our A team. We suspended those operations. It was our B team that played there. Here's the Court of Arbitration Sport ruling for against Miami and Kingston. During COVID, this is a photo I took from the last Cosmos match I've been able to see. Nobody there. I was up in the media booth, and Geistspiel, I think is the term they have in Germany, right? It was kind of a ghost game. And so while we were celebrating a half century of the club, by January 29th, the club suspended all team operations and has been on hiatus since. But Major League Soccer continues to brag about their growth. You can see how they talk about 8.3 million fans, average attendance, things like this. But you can see how Major League Soccer actually compares by just looking at Twitter accounts, right? Major League Soccer has 3.5 million followers. I don't know how many they pay for of that. The NBA has 47.1 million. The NFL has 36.3 million. Interesting that the NBA is more popular with social media than the NFL. So something generationally, I think. And Major League Baseball has far behind that 11.8 million. But again, that's very generational in terms of use of social media and popularity, relative popularity of each sport. So this is kind of a funny thing that Major League Soccer likes to brag about. They were bragging about highest total attendance among global soccer leagues, not mentioning the fact that they had 29 teams. So they're comparing themselves to leagues with 20 teams, but with 29 teams, obviously there's more matches, there's more teams, right? So in terms of highest total attendance, well, there's more matches, so of course. But how are people watching? You see that Apple TV on the sleeve there, right? TV coverage has shifted to subscription on Apple TV, and it's absolutely plummeted, right? So interest in this past year's MLS Cup final was the lowest ever. Lowest ever. Now, if you look at the number of professional teams since 1973, when there were 21, and you look at where we're at now, right, with more than 100, you would think there's been tremendous growth. But to what degree has that been a result of the system in the United States, or to what degree has that really been the greater globalization of the beautiful game and interest in world football, right? As while there's been all that growth, right, at least 199 pro-sanctioned teams have folded since 1992. We say that again. Nearly 200 clubs have ceased operation in that time. So more than have been created have died. No league in world sport, no other country can possibly compare to that in terms of the death rate or murder rate, if you will, for that, right? 72% of men's professional teams have failed or ceased pro operations. Cosmos would fall into that. We haven't folded, but we've ceased competitive operations, right? 57% of women's teams have folded or ceased pro operations. So that's the murder rate, if you will, the death rate for professional football here. And that takes us up to a few weeks ago. This was a photo I took just before I stepped in the federal courthouse in Brooklyn. That's a photo I took on the 24th of January from federal court. The NASL had sued United States Soccer and Major League Soccer for monopolism. Here's how that kind of plays out, right? The NASL claims in this lawsuit, U.S. Soccer and MLS have entered into an unlawful conspiracy to give MLS a monopoly over top-tier men's professional soccer. NASL also claims U.S. Soccer Federation, again, you see, our attorneys kept insisting on using the word federation here. They didn't want to use the word federation, and we felt very strongly that would bias. I was trying to remember the year, Tom, when U.S. Soccer Federation stopped calling itself USSF and started identifying just as U.S. Soccer. But in a court of law, that was a little bit problematic. So the rest of the way here, I want to get into some of the legal documents, right? Now, I just want to kind of give you a little bit of an idea about what's going on. Just before I left, I received a 2,537-page transcript of the trial. So I've been trying to consume that as best I can and pick out the really relevant bits and things like that. I was only in the courtroom one day. It was a dynamic day. But I've been going through the trial transcript of over 2,000 pages right now. So I want to give you a little bit of an idea about that. So this is from the lead attorney representing the NASL. Why would they enter into a conspiracy to favor MLS and to keep NASL from competing? You have to ask yourself, what's the why? What's the why? There are two whys. One is the economic motive. MLS and USSF entered into an economic partnership together, a company called Soccer United Marketing, SUM. And that company was used to jointly market and guarantee the broadcast rights and the sponsorship rights of the United States Soccer Federation. That only ended a couple of years ago. And so what happened is those were marketed together with the broadcast rights and the sponsorship rights of Major League Soccer. Again, U.S. men's national team, U.S. women's national team. U.S. women's national team probably far more popular than the U.S. men's team, I would say, because they're just better. And those broadcast rights were lumped together with Major League Soccer. And so they're joined together, right? As Kessler put it, imagine if two companies like Toyota and General Motors marketed together, jointly did it together, you'd see how they have a common economic interest. Antitrust laws wouldn't allow that. You're supposed to compete with each other. The point here is they joined together so that USSF became economically dependent on SUM, which was controlled by the MLS owners. So they needed to protect MLS. The second thing is they were run by the same people. That was the evidence we've shown on that, right? So in other words, there was a conflict of interest policy, which was report your conflict of interest. But when you're on a board and you recuse yourself from a certain decision, does that mean that your position on it or your intention would be kind of removed from it? Far from it, when everybody on the board has a seat at different tables. So this then becomes about the professional league standards. And the professional league standards determine what allows you to be sanctioned at different levels. So to be a D1 men's outdoor league, you need to have a minimum of 12 teams. By the third year, you need to have 14. Now you can see why in 2013, the NASL had 8 and then went up to 12. And then it went back down to 8, right? Why were they growing? They needed to grow. They had to grow because the idea was to go from D2 to D1. But the idea was we have to get more franchises to be able to claim any eligibility for that. U.S.-based teams must participate in all representative U.S. soccer and CONCACAF competitions for which they are eligible. Last year, Major League Soccer franchises did not all participate in the Open Cup, but they faced no sanction. Why not? They had something going on called the Leagues Cup, which was a partnership with Liga MX. So Mexican teams, there were no games played in Mexico. Mexican teams played in the United States at the home stadium of the Major League Soccer teams. That was right in the middle of the season. The timing of the first League Nations Cup was perfect with Messi joining the Miami franchise that Beckham's the part owner of. So in other words, they had the Southern tournament, and so the excuse given was fixture congestion. And there's been a lot of criticism of that. As you can imagine here, if the Big Six stopped participating in the FA Cup, which every once in a while they threatened to, but in Major League Soccer, they just decided not to. And weren't held to account. But you can see it's literally the second thing mandated in their very own professional league standards. So they're already violating, right? They're violating in that way. As you see here, other different things. U.S.-based teams must be located in at least the Eastern, Central, and Pacific time zones. Mountain time zone could be a little bit harder, right? So 3 time zones are required because the majority of the large population centers. 75% must play in metropolitan markets of at least 1 million persons. So I asked that in terms of UK, right? Think about the teams in the Premiership. Think about teams that are playing in the Championship, Division 1, and so on. How many of those are in cities that have 1 million residents? Stadia have to have a minimum seating capacity of 15,000, etc. Now, here's the one thing I really want to draw your attention to in the professional league standards. There must be one principal owner with a controlling interest of at least 35% of the team. Such principal owner must have an individual net worth of at least 40 million US dollars. So in other words, a supporters trust or any kind of grassroots initiative of that kind is not eligible for D1 soccer. Not eligible. Right? So any membership, right? So a structure like, say, Bayern Munich can't exist. Can't exist because you have to have a principal owner like that, right? The principal owner, together with all other owners, must have a combined individual net worth of at least 70 million US dollars. So for D2, they must have a minimum of 8 for D2. By year 3, they must be up to 10. By year 6, they must be up to 12. So again, you can see the NASL was desperate to add franchises to try to stay eligible at D2 and then D1. What was happening, though, is that teams that were playing in NASL were moving to USL or even to the MLS. But what would happen is, because MLS is a single entity, they would have to disband. They would have to dissolve their corporate entity. And then the franchise, usually the same investor operator groups, right? They would go in, right? And they would join MLS. So several clubs either went to dissolved and went to MLS as a franchise in the single entity. Some others went to USL and hoped that they would go up. So, for instance, the San Antonio franchise that we defeated in the 2015 final. That was the last year in the NASL. They were bought out. They joined USL. They thought they were going to go up, but then Austin came in and took their spot in terms of territorial rights. That's another thing related to franchise scarcity, is that many of these franchises have territorial rights. I could get into that later if you want. So when there's a situation like Los Angeles or New York, there are certain exceptions. They operate within the same market, but they're not allowed to operate outside 120 miles of a designated market. So again, in terms of financial viability here, ownership group had these things. So I wanted to give you just a little bit of an idea here, in terms of what was going on in court. Right? So this was when my boss, Eric Stover, was on the stand. He was asked, would you say the New York Cosmos has a long history in the United States? Objection, leading. Right. So I'm not sure if Ms. Gray was the attorney for MLS or the attorney for U.S. Soccer. Right? We had 11 attorneys. They had 10 attorneys. The 10 attorneys were between MLS and U.S. Soccer. So I'm not sure right now. Ms. Gray, I actually met her. I have to say it was a shame that she had no hot water in her shower that night. But because we did hear that she was going on, she said she had no hot water. She was very upset about that. But I don't know who she was representing, MLS or U.S. Soccer. But she objected to that. Leading, would you say the New York Cosmos has a long history? That was the kind of thing they were objecting to. Any little thing, right? I'll allow, you can answer. Yes, absolutely. Over the course of the club's history as a Cosmos, been able to track top 2 champions. Yes, in the 70s and 80s. And then during our time, we had Marcos Sena from Villarreal, Raul from Real Madrid, Juan Arango from Borussia Mönchengladbach, so many great players. Right? That's Eric Stover, right? What is the impact of USSF's divisional sanctions on professional leagues and the clubs within those leagues? Objection. Sustained. Let's stop and think about that. The entire case is about promotion, relegation, and the sanctioning at the league levels. But when a question is asked about the impact of those divisional sanctions, objection, sustained. That was what the case was about. Now, the judge proclaimed himself a fan of the Buffalo Bills NFL franchise. He called them the only football team in New York, by the way. As a Giants fan and Cosmos fan, that was a little tough to take. And that was really interesting when the owner of the Kansas City Chiefs was on the stand. And they were playing the Bills to get into the Super Bowl 2 days later. So that was the kind of objection that was being raised and sustained. What was the NASL's divisional sanction on Cosmo joining the league? Division 2. Who was the owner? Managing partner was Seamus O'Brien. The other 50% was individuals or family members from Saudi Arabia. You may know them as Sailor Sport. During the time of the Cosmos, was there ever discussions about NASL being sanctioned? Absolutely. It was our primary goal. Objection. I'll allow it. Primary goal is to grow the club, but also to help the league grow and ultimately be a Division 1 league. was our goal right from the start. I got a lot of questions from the media about this very question, and my objection, Your Honor, that part can come in. Why don't we ask the question? This isn't a narrative. So here the judge was being a little bit more reasonable. Did the Cosmos ever communicate their desire to play in Division I to NASL? Yes. So the Cosmos believe the NASL could grow to be Division I? Yes. Without promotion or relegation in the United States, now this is Eric Stover on the stand, Sean, to your question about promotion or relegation. Eric used the words promotion or relegation. Objection, Your Honor, sustained, strike that part. So in other words, we weren't allowed to use the words promotion and relegation in court, even though that's what it was all about. How frequently would you have conversations about divisional sanctioning? It was a regular conversation. Yes, daily, hourly. It was our primary goal to get the club back up to the top tier. And did the Cosmos continue to improve themselves to make it up to that top tier level? Objection, Your Honor, sustained. What did the Cosmos do to continue to improve themselves? Objection, sustained. Did the Cosmos take action to make changes? Strike that. Did the Cosmos make changes to any part of the organization to try to comply with Division I? Objection. The judge didn't even understand it. I don't really understand the question, he said. But if the witness understands the question, he can answer it. Can you repeat it, please? Sure. When the Cosmos joined the NASL is Division II, correct? Correct. Why are the Cosmos interested in divisional sanction? It has a direct impact on the success of the business, profit and loss statement, ability to attract sponsors, things like that. Our major sponsors were Nike and Emirates. Does Division I attract more sponsors? Objection, sustained. Now, if that wasn't relevant, I don't know what is. We couldn't talk about promotion or relegation. We couldn't talk about sponsorship. Emirates Airlines were not going to sponsor a Division II team for years. They certainly weren't going to sponsor a Division III team. Wasn't going to happen. He was asked at one point, do you know why Mr. Camiso is willing to invest in the Cosmos? Objection. He can answer if he knows. He wanted to save the Cosmos. Question is whether you know. Sorry. Yeah, go right. So again, this is the kind of thing. So here's Clark Hunt, son of Lamar Hunt, and the owner of the Kansas City Chiefs franchise, getting the trophy named after his father when they beat the Bills that Sunday night. He was asked, do you believe the MLS needed USFF to be telling it how many teams to have in order to succeed as a league? Again, professional league standards say you have to have so many teams. Did they need that? No. Do you agree that a new sports league starting up, because his father was part of the AFL that challenged the NFL and eventually merged into them in the 1960s. He was also one of the owners of the original NASL and then was one of the founding investors for Major League Soccer. Do you agree that a new sports league starting out competing in the marketplace should get the opportunity, get some years in order to show it can be successful and complete? Objection, Your Honor. Sustained. Mr. Hunt, did the AFL need those years to show it could be successful and compete? It took the AFL about 6 years to show that it could compete. You didn't have to 6 years. Right. And when your dad, you mentioned how your dad started the NASL, correct? Yes. I'm sorry, the original NASL. I should have specified that to the jury. Back in the day, right? Back in the late 60s, yes. And he was committed to making that league a success, right? Because he's always loved soccer and wanted to develop it. That is correct, right. And did he even support filing an antitrust lawsuit against the NFL to achieve that objective? The original NASL sued the NFL for antitrust back then when the NFL tried to block any NFL owners from investing in soccer. Our attorney, Jeffrey Kessler, was the attorney on that case. Objection. Sustained. No more questions. In other words, we couldn't make our case. So here's the attorney, Jeffrey Kessler. And he's also the lead attorney on the recent victory over the NCAA, over image rights. So, and he talks there. So this was the verdict, though, right? The verdict came in. There was a decision had to be on Division I and Division II, but the decision was on whether the relevant market, right? Did North American Soccer League prove the existence of one or both of the following relevant antitrust markets? Okay, as Seth Louderwood said, MLS is irrelevant. Is there a relevant market for Division I soccer? No. The market for team membership in a Division I men's professional soccer league located in the United States and Canada. No. D2. No. They didn't prove the existence of the market. U.S. Soccer issued this when the verdict came in on February 3rd. This is an important victory for the broader sports landscape in the U.S. And to get back to Sean's initial point there, in other words, what's at stake, and the attorneys that are involved representing U.S. Soccer and MLS also worked on things for other leagues, right? What's at stake is what is often known as the North American sport model of closed leagues. That's what's at stake with this. So Kessler wins the decision against the NCAA, breaks that up. But could we imagine a Syracuse University or a Notre Dame playing football or basketball against the Chicago Bears or the Chicago Bulls? In the future, perhaps, if there is promotion and relegation, right? UNAM Pumas in Mexico is a university-owned team, right? But Tom's son maybe could have kept playing for Notre Dame if there wasn't this kind of closed thing, right? So they see it then as a victory for North American sports. U.S. Soccer comes right out and says that. But, of course, the jury didn't really say that. The jury never ruled on whether there was conspiracy to restrain trade at D1 or D2 levels. They never were able to decide on that because they simply decided on whether a relevant market had been proven. The NASL statement claimed that various changes in the system that have happened while the lawsuit was pending have already taken place, but insisting that we will appeal. And then this big news on the 13th, in the immediate aftermath of this move, the USL announces that they want to try for Division I sanctioning in the next couple of years, with an ultimate goal of promotion and relegation between their various divisions. So again, if you remember that initial chart, they want to have a D1. Right now they have a D2 and a D3. They want to have a D1, and then eventually, once they have a D1, 2, 3, they want to move towards promotion relegation at some point in the future. It would still be a closed league, and there would still probably be some kind of territorial rights, right? So again, with a team already playing now in Westchester and in New Jersey and in Brooklyn, would there be any room with territorial rights in New York for the Cosmos? Right now, we're a bit boxed out, no matter what, and we've never been invited to the table with the USL to begin with. But that's the big news just from the 13th. What's today's date?
David, that looks like the USL is shaping up to be a rival to the MLS.
Precisely. So the timing of the court decision and the announcement from USL is not coincidence whatsoever. Right. So in other words, they were able to block the NASL from trying to go D1. They're going to be able to do it to USL? I rather doubt it. Now, it still won't open up the whole system. It would still be a closed system with promotion relegation amongst those. MLS could still do its thing and have its first and third division between the commercial league, what it calls a commercial league, and what it calls a developmental league, right? For the first and third that they have. But if they've got 1, 2, 3, eventually they'd like that. So there would be promotion relegation, but it wouldn't be an open system. It would still be a closed system. Now, again, what was happening when the D2 sanctioning was revoked, Sunil Gulati, as president of U.S. Soccer, was trying to force a merger with USL and NASL. But Cosmos weren't involved in any of that. And some of the teams did go to USL, and some of them still are competing there. So that brings us up to the present. And I thank you for your time, and happy to field any questions you may have.
I mean, I have a lot of questions, but I think you guys should go first.
As I said, a very partisan perspective, right? But mine comes from being a fan of the Cosmos and wanting my club around.
I'll softball one here. There are many people in the United States soccer community who would say it's never been better. We have more interest, more teams, better players, everything, infrastructure. We have a series of mega events coming up over the next several summers. What would David Kilpatrick say to that argument? Because
it's despite the structure. It's despite it, and it's because of So again, what happened since 1994 in the World Cup? The internet, right? The ability to watch every Premier League every day, right? That's one thing I didn't include this year, but Garber at one point a few years ago said we need to keep all the foreign leagues off TV, right? There's too much soccer on US TV, right? So again, going back to those images from 12 days apart, right? Arsenal, Manchester United draws over 70,000. Were there really even 11,000? Was it really? To see the local derby? How does a local derby not sell out? But it didn't even fill half the stadium for a 25,000 seat. Right. So again, that's the thing. In other words, the globalization of football has been so pervasive. Right. So again, you're an Arsenal supporter. I'm an Arsenal supporter. Right. When I moved back to New York from London in 1995, I think I was the only person in town who had an Arsenal scarf. Now, when I see kids get out of school at 3 o'clock, you'll see Arsenal tops, you'll see Man United tops, you'll see Man City tops, you'll see Liverpool tops, you'll see Real Madrid tops, Barca tops. Right. The biggest teams in the world are household names in the United States now. But Major League Soccer is still culturally relevant. So when I asked, and so I gave you the example of when last week, in anticipation of coming here, when I coached 2 academy teams, right? One is 2011s, kids born in 2011, kids born in 2012. 2 teams, so 2 surveys, right? We were trying to ask questions in terms of who got to be team captain. And so we asked them, who's the defending champion of MLS? That wasn't the team down the road. First group. No one knew. No one knew. 15 boys, all born in the year 2012. Not one of them knew that it was the LA Galaxy. Even though the LA Galaxy defeated, guess who, in the final? The New York Red Bulls. In other words, one of the 2 local teams had lost the final to Los Angeles. That should be a marketing dream. LA versus New York. We had an LA versus New York World Series. We had an LA versus New York MLS Cup final. None of these kids knew. In the 2011s, one kid knew it was the Galaxy.
A few questions online.
Yeah.
Robert, I think we can hear you. Do you want to ask your question? Right. Well, I've got the question here. Yeah. Where does the MLS for USL bubble leave other semi-pro leagues like the NISA and the NPSL? They meet the criteria for the number of clubs, etc.
In rough strains. It's unclear whether NISA will be able to survive the year, quite frankly. And NPSL, their kind of drive towards professionalization is really stalled. They may be just stuck at amateur level. So any of those clubs, if they can't get in. So again, so for instance, the club that I'm coaching for now, Eastern FC, we would have to pick one of these leagues. USL isn't even a possibility. The professional league standards have certain ownership levels that they can't possibly compete. So again, the idea of supporters trust and things like that, grassroots organizations, there's no way. So the local USL franchise that's starting play this year in our county, Westchester County, which is just the county north of the Bronx. It's a cannabis billionaire who just bought the franchise rights to the 3rd division USL, right? And he said to me, he's expecting Pro Rel. This is before the announcement. So a few weeks ago, he came to campus, and I asked if we all had to sign NDAs when he said, I'm expecting Pro Rel. Ironically enough, even though Miami FC joined with Kingston Stockade on that Court for Arbitration of Sport clause there, because Miami FC paid to be in the Division 2, I'm told that they're actually one of the big obstacles to promotion relegation within USL. In other words, within USL, some owners paid their expansion fee to be at a certain level. And now they want some kind of compensation if those who pay at a lower level. So in other words, the billionaire who owns this new entity in Westchester Soccer Club, he could afford to pay for D2, but he's just going to put the team in D3 and expect that he'll be able to win his way up in a few years once it's finished.
And Robert has a follow-up question. He says, David, when it comes down to it, is it a dispute about sport governance or is it about sport business? I mean, what's the fundamental reason why MLS don't want to play ball with promotion relegation?
That's such a brilliant, subtle distinction. And in fact, early on in the court case, I was upset because our attorney Kessler wanted to attack U.S. soccer's ability to sanction at all. And I thought that would be thrown out the baby with the bathwater. In other words, I think sanctioning regulations, just like you have in UEFA, right? You have certain licensure standards that have to be met, right? I was at Accrington Stanley the other day. Do they have the infrastructure for Premier League team? No. So it makes sense to have some kind of licensure for sanctioning between one bubble to another, right? So, I'm at Accrington Stanley, a couple hours later at Blackburn Rovers. The difference in terms of stadia and infrastructure is really obvious. So in other words, the part of the case was originally to say U.S. soccer has no right to sanction at all. I was very glad when that got dropped out of the case. So really it's a matter of applicability. So the year that we lost our Division II sanction, and we needed, I think it was, again, I have to go back to those 2,500 pages worth of transcripts, right? But I think we needed 5 or 7 waivers. USL was granted 31 waivers that year at D2 sanction, right? Now, in the courtroom, they tried making a distinction between club or team waivers and league waivers. And one of the witnesses for Major League Soccer said, well, a league waiver is a bigger waiver than that. So, in other words, NYCFC came into existence when the Cosmos were coming back, right? But they didn't have a stadium that fit FIFA regulations, which is again another stipulation. So they needed a club waiver to be able to play at Yankee Stadium. It's too narrow. It's way too narrow. And so anytime they've played CONCACAF matches, they've had to play it elsewhere, right? So they've even played home matches at Red Bull Arena because that's at least a FIFA thing. So
we're coming to the very innocent question from Mark O'Neill. Mark asks, why is the ownership criteria so strict on owner wealth? And is there any significant groundswell of opinion to allow for fan ownership of clubs? Maybe hear a lot.
To me, that's the real heart of the matter. And that's what I think it takes me back to the first image I shared with you with the Oval Office. That monopolism and oligarchy and the use of sport washing are all factors to consider here. And the idea that you have to have and now again, the current owner of the Cosmos, Rocco Panizza, is one of the wealthiest people in the world. Now, in terms of the relevant market, okay, well, if you can go and invest in Fiorentina, so what if you can't have a first division team in New York? What's the relevant market, right? Was the jury thinking that way? I don't know. So we actually did have somebody wealthy enough, wealthier than anybody that owns anything in MLS. But that still doesn't get you into that exclusive club, right? So, but what that does is it dissociates the game from its grassroots. And so it has that kind of bland corporatist feel to it that really keeps it from becoming culturally relevant. And so, and again, I thought that was the remarkable thing about the Save the Crew movement, was this kind of groundswell. And it was local businessmen that came together. One of them had the net worth to justify the new franchise to keep the Crew in Columbus, right? But that was the real threat, and that was what the state of Ohio was saying. We've invested infrastructure in this team, and then they can just go to Texas whenever, right? But again, it's this. So, and that's why I think the owners, the NFL, the NBA, and Major League Baseball are watching very carefully what's going on with Major League Soccer, because this keeps hegemony in the hands of the most wealthy.
But Ben Mayer has an interesting question, which is a sort of a spin on that, where he says, it's a classic defense of the American system. Does the potential promotion relegation in the US system USL lead owners anxious on possible financial instability that comes from a lack of consistent revenue seen by traditional North American sports. In other words, obviously, one of the problems with promotion relegation is you get relegated as a financial catastrophe. All the data suggests you've got to overspend in order to get into the Premier League. I mean, is it, I'm paraphrasing, Ben, I know you're listening, but I mean, if you go for promotion or relegation, do you just simply introduce the European problem of loss making?
Well, I'll answer it with this anecdote. One of my best friends was at a meeting with Don Garber, and who's the commissioner of Major League Soccer. And Garber asked if anyone in the room had any questions. And my friend rather cheaply said, "What do you think about promotion relegation? When's it coming to MLS?" And Garber said, "Oh, I love it. Worldwide, it's great. It's so neat. It's so cool. But it can't happen here because we've got so much infrastructure where cities such as Nashville are subsidizing the stadium. So we can't ask a city to give $100 million for a new stadium when all of a sudden they're going to be minor league." And that's the real issue here, right? Major league, minor league. Sorry?
It's a clever practical argument, actually.
Precisely. And this is why St. Louis franchise was delayed for a short while. There is a public referendum on subsidizing stadium for a new franchise in St. Louis, which is traditional soccer hotbed. The public would not subsidize. So Major League Soccer initially would not award the franchise because that public subsidy vote failed. Why? Because that then, as you said, right, then Garber can say, well, they're not going to have, they just built a new stadium. That can't be a minor league stadium. So they're very clever about when they use Division 1, 2, 3 globally, and then when they use Major League, minor league. So we had Raul, we had Marcus Sena. It was the Cosmos. Well, they were still alive. He was at some games, right? But we couldn't get the coverage from the New York Times like we did in the 1970s and 80s because we were minor league. We were Division 2, right? So Major League and minor league, rhetorically, they're very powerful, especially in the North American sport media. But then global football, it's, we think Division 1, 2, 3. So when you're talking about a sponsorship like Emirates Airlines, that whether you can be D1 or D2 is going to make a big difference. So that's my answer to that, is that, I think when you look at something like the Bundesliga, then, FC Köln have dropped down to Bundesliga 5, but they still sell out every game, right? If you've got that community interest, if you've got a membership model that the professional league standards won't allow because of the financial, the financial level of investment, it's actually prohibiting that kind of fan involvement that would sustain a team through relegation drops.
Can I ask one last question, then throw it over the floor? So one of the reasons I was particularly keen on having you here tonight is that, as everybody based in Europe will know, we've had the Super League initiative and they haven't gone away. Came back before Christmas again. The initial iteration was pretty much a closed league. Now they say they want promotion relegation of a sort. It's not very convincing. But the rhetoric around it is the closed league is the future, all the best players playing in the same league, all with the biggest brands. This is what the world wants, not the legacy fans. Yeah, you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
And the US situation is presented as you guys you're very happy with your closed league system and you don't want any changes. I know it's a rhetorical question, David, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So, I would say that franchise scarcity is applied on the American sporting landscape. So the real competition in the major three, even the four leagues, if you include the NHL, right? The real competition is between cities, right? So can you take when the stadium deal is not so sweet anymore, can another city take that franchise away? That's part of the game, right? But that keeps so many out. And it also it has a system that rewards failure, right? When the TV revenues are coming back in, the Philadelphia 76ers in the NBA, right? They tanked for several years to stockpile draft picks. They didn't have to worry about the Pittsburgh Pirates. My wife was from Pittsburgh, right? The Pittsburgh Pirates have no ambition to field a winning team whatsoever. Why? Because they have enough revenue coming in. So going back to that slide from Ted Lasso, it's not just for football. It's not just association football. These meaningless games happen in all of these leagues, right? Once your team is out of the playoff fund, right, then the games become meaningless. Right? So try getting somebody to go to an NHL game the last week of the season when they're not in the playoffs. You can't pay someone to go to a game. That literally happened to me, by the way, for a game this past NHL season, where one team was out of the playoff picture. I could not get anyone to go. I had a suite, a corporate suite, and I couldn't get friends of mine who were devoted fans of that team to go to the corporate suite because they were out of the playoff picture and didn't care. So again, meaningful games. When there's promotion or relegation, there's more meaningful games. When there's no threat of relegation, even though you may have a playoff system that seems to keep teams in the mix, you have less meaningful games in that structure. So then, paradoxically, in the United States, the more meaningful games are the friendlies with these bigger teams. So, and my appeal would be, in terms of the European Super League issue, is I hear an awful lot of let's protect our model, which kind of strikes me as a bit of NIMBYism. Everybody knows what that means, right? Not in my backyard. Not in my backyard. And I'm asking for global solidarity on this. I'm asking for global solidarity, right? We need help from the world sporting community to say, this North American sport model, not only do we not want it brought to the rest of the world, it's not good in North America either. FIFA needs to apply its sporting integrity statute globally, universally, without exception. And then that needs to be extended to the other sports as well. And I think so many of those franchises that just kind of drift through meaningless games, right? So many teams around Major League Baseball, they generate revenue when the big teams like the Yankees or the Dodgers come to town, right? The biggest teams in Florida, we were talking about this yesterday, right? Vic and I are both Mets fans, right? The Florida Marlins and the Tampa Bay Devil Rays are both Major League Baseball teams, but the two most popular teams in Florida are the Mets and the Yankees.
Thanks very much for a really interesting talk, David. Two questions. First is, what's your view on the number of US investors who are buying European clubs? Secondly, your view on the other important legal case, which is over relevant sports.
Yes.
And the permission for European leagues to have matches in the States.
I'm a bit mixed on both of those. When it comes to the relevant issue, right? So if everyone knows that, right? La Liga wanted to have some regular season matches in the United States. And Major League Soccer in particular did not want that to happen. And so they had the United States Soccer Federation to block that, right? So, and again, your friend Charlie Stolzano was very much involved in that case, right? So again, this threat to Major League Soccer hegemony, right? If you can see El Clasico, and it's not just a friendly, it even really counts in the standings in the table, why would you bother to see Messi's Miami play the Columbus Crew? If you've only got X number of dollars to invest in your sporting entertainment for the month, where are you going to take your family? So the relevant case has to do with that. And I can, now, if I was a La Liga fan, I could understand an objection to that, right? And I support that. However, the rationale behind objecting to that, I have a little bit of an issue with. So again, I think in terms of my ideals, I should really kind of just say the Spanish team should stay in Spain for this Spanish games, right? However, these are the most meaningful games, and in terms of the greater growth of the game, it's really those matches where the big clubs come over that's actually really generating any sustainable growth, I would argue. And your first question again
was about US investment in Europe.
Yeah. Again, I'm a little bit divided on that because I do a little bit of consulting on that, right? And I would just say, without getting too specific about things, you want to make sure that the investor has some kind of meaningful relation to the community in which they're willing to invest. And that it needs to be something that's not just a fad, that there's a real passion And that was actually something Clark Hunt mentioned on the stand in the day that I was in court, is that investment in sport takes passion. So is it a commercial investment, or you're trying to tap in on a return on investment? So the Glazers' investment in Manchester United, for instance, is a disgrace. As an Arsenal supporter, I was absolutely great. So Cosmo stopped fielding a team in 1984. I first went to Highbury in 1994, 10 years later. And I fell in love with seeing pro football match. Right? Johnny Ensign scored. And my heart, my heart was filled once more, like this gap that I had for 10 years, right? So when Crumpy Sport Enterprises took over, I was really nervous because Crumpy's invested in all the North American sports. And then I really got upset when all the shares were bought out. That to me, I was terrified that the lifeblood of the club would be gone. But to me, the Arsenal, the heart of the club is really the Arsenal Supporters Club. When you step off the Arsenal tube and you take a left-hand turn, that's the club. And that heart, that soul can't be stolen away by any number of dollars. But I think despite my initial concerns, I have to say that especially, if not the father, Stan Kroenke, I think he's probably more concerned about the LA Rams. But his son has done an amazing job of listening to the supporters and doing a good job. But I think that's the real, right? So in other words, I think they're in it for the long term. I think they're in it for good reasons. Am I a little bit concerned? Yeah. So I think it depends on a case-by-case basis. For other American investments, it's very often like a kind of a family connection to an area, right? Or maybe you've got a dear friend who's working at a club. I won't name the Premier League club, but one friend who's looking to invest went to LSE with somebody who's involved in the club, and so that's got him interested in that because of the friendship. Not necessarily, it wasn't they went to university in this town, or that they're necessarily a fan of that club, but one of the other owners, right? So that type of thing. But sometimes you go to a match and you fall in love, and if you have the money, you do it. You know, I think Rocco Camiso has been a great investor for AFC Fiorentina. I think any fans of Fiorentina would say he's been marvelous. I honestly would rather he wasn't invested in another team. You know, but even that American foreign investment in 1983-84, Giorgio Chianali had control of ownership of the Cosmos, but then he was also owner of Lazio at the same time, and it didn't work. So how focused are you? How involved are you? What are the reasons for it? In other words, I don't want to just say, oh, it's a bad thing, because I think it just really depends on each context. Because they can sometimes come in and save the club.
A couple of questions. You mentioned the general awareness of the teams you coach about American teams. I presume that's not true of the Premier League. There's no.
Same group of kids. I asked the question. What's the point difference between first and second? Who's in first and second? Really? Liverpool, Arsenal. What's the point difference? 7. They all knew.
And the same with Spanish and German and Italian leagues, or
there were only so many questions we were asking as they were trying to, raise the hand, and but they all knew. Like everybody knew 7 points. Okay. They all knew. Right. The Premier League's the biggest.
Yeah.
Right. But of the 30 kids that I was coaching that night, 4 or 5 were Arsenal supporters, 6 or 7 were Liverpool supporters. Others had their own clubs. They all knew what the Premier League table looked like. But they didn't know who the defending champion of Major League Soccer was. So again, it's just anecdotal, but these are kids who are living football. Their lives are football. And they know the Premier League table, they don't have any idea what was going on in the domestic league. So it's culturally relevant.
Can I ask a second question? I'm very much a novice in this area. I haven't seen an ad for the thing, and I'm interested in my home team of Glasgow Rangers has got some interest from, I think, the owner of the San Francisco 49ers. So yeah. I thought, I must go along and listen to this. Are there any American sports that made it big that aren't locked up by corporate interest? Is there anything that's come up from the ground?
Green Bay Packers in the NFL. Green Dacker's the only exception to that. And yeah, I mean, you know, before the Sevco disillusion and all that, right? Trump had shown some interest in investing in Rangers. And I don't know to what degree I don't know if you heard about the new head coaching, the new coaching team that's just been signed for, Knock Alley this afternoon. To what degree potential foreign investment is there or not? Now, again, the 49ers ownership team is kind of interesting. They have some kind of concerns with Leeds United, right? And they are also very invested in the Major League Cricket initiative. Right, the owner of the Niners is really trying to make cricket catch on at T20 level in the United States, but they're really having a hard time getting traction. So how serious would they be about Rangers? I don't know.
I don't know what's in it for them.
Right, I don't quite know what's in it for them.
Yeah.
I really don't. Especially because the way that finances work out right now, Celtic are in such a gap from them. I don't know what their investment could do. So when I've been approached recently about investment in Scottish football, right? Dumbarton, the crisis at Dumbarton. I thought that might be a cool thing to invest in because of the rock, the castle, and that, in other words, the kind of football romantic may really enjoy. The rock, but so that when potential investors said to me, well, how far is Dumbarton from the airport? To your question, right? How far is Dumbarton from the airport? And I'm talking about, Merlin stayed there. I'm trying to say to the billionaire, Merlin, they say Merlin stayed there at Dumbarton. Maybe you should look at Dumbarton because, what was the old firm is, it's not an option. But, again, foreign investment, look at what the Canadian owner had done for Celtic in the 80s, right?
Well, he was sort of Canadian. He was originally from Scotland.
Yeah.
He was a Fergus McCann. He was at a Celtic supporters club. So he was. Yeah, he was. He was Canadian. He was a hybrid.
Yeah. So I think that's probably, to my mind, that was an example. So they really did an amazing thing for the club. So yeah, these rumors about the 49ers investment in Rangers, I'm really wondering, like, what's in, really?
Yeah, you need a bucket of cash there.
Yeah, I've got a question. You say that in the MLS, supporters don't go because they just don't.
Yeah.
We played in the summer, we played 3 games in the States. We had Manchester United, Liverpool, both sold out, 55,000. The complete merchandise was sold completely. All right, the ticket prices were astronomical. But then before we played them 2, the owners got together and said, let's have a behind closed doors Arsenal versus Bournemouth. But then the owners got together again and said, why don't we put it in the LA Galaxy Stadium?
Oh, yeah.
And we got 24,000.
Yeah.
Which, at such short notice, it's a lot, for 2 clubs.
Yeah, my sense of that was they didn't market it right.
Well, no, because it was going to be behind closed doors.
Oh, so I when I saw the turnout for that, I found it embarrassing.
Well, I think you say the publicity of it. It was only 2 owners got together and said, instead of playing behind closed doors, why don't we let people watch it?
Oh, I didn't know that was going to be closed.
The LA Galaxy Stadium was near where both teams were training.
Yeah.
So they decided to open that up and just sell the tickets.
Yeah.
Again, astronomical prices, but 24,000 for a silly friendly.
Yes.
And yet, Manchester United, Liverpool, they all go to the States, Aston Villa, and they get absolute fortunes because of the crowds.
Yeah, Liverpool set the record for Philadelphia soccer fans.
Which is strange, isn't it?
It was very strange.
You've got people like Lionel Messi, and the stadium ain't sold.
Yeah. And what's happening there too, like the MLS franchises are charging much, much higher tickets for the Miami games.
Yes.
But then people are disappointed if Messi gets play.
Yeah, because you don't know
Even
Miami's
not a great sports town anyways. Messi substituted out, everybody just walks out.
You pay $500 to sit in the stands, thinking Messi's going to run out, and he's not even in the squad.
Yeah.
Because he chipped his nail varnish or something.
Yeah. But yeah, the Arsenal Bournemouth one was a weird
Yeah,
Apple thing.
all it was because it was behind closed doors, and then they decided let's play it in front of public.
It just mentioned about the Apple TV deal flopping. Is there any particular reason behind that or reasons?
One is, I think that not only did you have to have an Apple TV subscription, you had to have an additional MLS Plus subscription. And when you've got fee after fee after fee after fee, speaking for myself, right, to be able to watch the Arsenal, I have to have a cable package so I can watch games on USA Network. I have to have Peacock to watch other Premier League matches. I have to have ESPN for FA Cup, and I have to have Paramount Plus to watch Champions League, right? So my son wanted to watch the MLS playoffs, and because I was an Apple subscriber, which I was because of Ted Lasso, I refused to pay for it, but it allowed it into the playoffs. And then I had to cancel the subscription before the fee kicked in, which is what I did, right? I would imagine lots of people are in the same boat with that, right? So prior to the switch to Apple, I would still watch the New York games. You know, if I didn't have anything going on, because they're local players and I've got friends working for the different franchises, and in other words, there's so many American soccer players who I think are so talented, and I want to support that at any level. And I want to see them play. I want to know who the better players are and things like that. So a more casual viewer, like if I had the Madison Square Garden network on my cable package, and the Red Bulls are playing, and my friend Shep Messing is doing the color commentary, well, to hear Shep's voice and to maybe see some local academy products out on the pitch, I tune in. But am I going to pay, what is this a month? Do you know?
Like 150 to 125.
I was going to say it was like $15 a month, I think.
Yeah.
It was not. I'm not paying $15 a month for this monopolistic thing that's destroyed this thing I love. I'm not going to have it. So my son said, "Oh, do we have that right now?" And then the season's open. I said, "No, I'm not. I'm not spending the money on that subscription. No way." Oh, I get it. So I think it's a matter of like how many subscription fees are you going to have, and again, how meaningful is it? So if we could compare how many Paramount Plus subscribers, how many ESPN subscribers, how many Peacock subscribers are there for football alone, that's really hard to tell. But so how many actually did on Apple? Garber was interviewed about this last week and he was asked a question about this in an interview last week. And he said, "Oh, I'd like to see greater transparency in the numbers." But, do you? Because you might not like what you see.
And the big thing there is, say, East Coast. I lived in New Jersey. I live here in London now. You can wake up at 7:30 in the morning and watch meaningful games all the way till midnight. The TV would stay on the whole day. You're in and out. Maybe you run a chore. Then you're locked into a certain game. Here, there is scarcity of games. There's 12:30. There's the 5:30. The 3 o'clock is the blackout. Some other channels have other leagues, but there is an embarrassment of riches on the television in the U.S.
And the USL is now on ESPN.
Yeah, you're not even talking about digital platform.
Yeah, in terms of digital, right? So I already subscribed to ESPN to watch the FA Cup matches and watch the Bundesliga. And then if I can watch USL, and I've got family from Pittsburgh, so I want to watch the Pittsburgh Riverhounds. So I'll watch the Pittsburgh Riverhounds. I lived in Memphis for several years as a kid, so I was watching the Memphis team. But they just relocated this year. Why? Because they couldn't get the city of Memphis or the state of Tennessee to do public subsidy for a soccer stadium. So the owner said, we've got to relocate. Right? So again, so I watched the Pittsburgh and the Memphis games, and then the Memphis team just relocated. Which again kind of speaks to the whole problem here.
Yeah, so I think you raised an interesting perspective of how cities operate. And the role, I would be interested in your sort of further thoughts on the role of sort of metro mayors and local governance in that sense, which I think is, from over this side of the Atlantic, we lose sight of, because even whatever we make of Mr. Khan in London, it's still a relatively new thing in the UK context of having proactive political mayor, and actually their purview into things like relationships with sporting franchises. That's not something that's been part of culture in the United Kingdom. I think possibly a little bit more on the continent, but perhaps less so. So I'd be interested in that. And then the second question I have is, when are the Cosmos fixtures? When's the next fixture you're going to go to for the Cosmos?
Well, in terms of the political thing, I'll just give you the one example of the Buffalo Bills and their new stadium, right? I don't really enjoy the NFL anymore, especially with all the awareness of concussions and all the effects it has. So it's at best a guilty pleasure for me. But when I do watch, I watch the New York Football Giants. And so a judge saying the only team in New York, Buffalo, irked me because Buffalo's so far away. And the Bills fan base like to call themselves the Bills Mafia, which I don't understand why that's supposed to be a good thing. But I think it works out to $1.1 million a game or something like that. New York State taxpayers are going to be subsidizing the Buffalo Bills' new stadium, which will have something like 15,000 to 20,000 less seats than the current one. Less seats for a new stadium to replace a stadium that's perfectly fine. Why? Because they were threatened with franchise relocation, right? They were threatened with the prospect of going to Toronto. Now, Toronto already has the Toronto Argonauts in the Canadian Football League. But would Toronto really take the Buffalo Bills away from Buffalo? Who knows? Some city in the United States would, though, of course. And so now again, we could get into Governor Hochul and her husband and his connection with the concessions. Right? There's a bit of conflict of interest there in terms of he was an attorney representing the company that had the concessions deal at the current Bills Stadium. So there's some kind of dodginess of that in terms of the potential conflict of interest, spousal conflict of interest with the governor of New York, right? But essentially, she, even though she's a Democrat, was able to try to build up her voting base in a very Republican or right-wing area of upstate New York. Right? I don't even consider that upstate. To me, that's Western New York. I don't even consider that upstate. I mean, that's Western New York, just like the other states, right? But she doesn't have much support in that area. But at least she did this deal that New York taxpayers didn't have any vote on because she kept the Bills here for the next 30 years. Right? The next 30 years. Well, then what happens in 30 years? Because again, when you look at, so this is one thing, one exercise I do with a lot of my sport management students. So I'll get them to look at Nielsen designated market areas and the size of the market. And I showed you in professional league standards there how you have to have so many franchises in markets that have more than 1 million people or not. That has to do with federal designations of broadcast zones and how many people are living within it, right? So again, the Green Bay Packers, right? This kind of grassroots thing where it's actually kind of a shareholder thing. It's an exception within that, right? It's kind of a miracle that that market has any team there, but it's because the revenue sharing agreement that teams like the New York Giants and the Philadelphia Eagles had dealt with generations ago to distribute any revenue kind of rather equally between, right? But that's never going to happen. So when I was a kid living in Memphis, I saw the basketball team go away. I saw the pro football team go away. I saw the pro soccer team go away. And I saw the baseball teams being minor league affiliates of all these major league teams. So when you live in America, you either live in a major league city or a minor league city, right? You either live in a major league city or a minor league city. So municipalities are always playing against each other to try to become a major league city. Look at the investment in Nashville and their stadium, as they've been desperate to try to become a major league city. Memphis had more pro sports teams in the 70s. Now Nashville is a major league city.
So what is, just so you know, so what is, I mean, the answer's obvious, but I'm going to ask you anyway. So what's Vegas done? You know, it becoming the major league city from nowhere 15 years ago.
They were forbidden from it because of gambling, right? Trying to protect sporting integrity. But then with digitization of gambling, suddenly location became less critical, right? But when you look at those designated market areas, right, Vegas doesn't have that large of a population of residents. However, right, so try getting a ticket to a Raiders game in Vegas. It's impossible, right? It's $500, $600 a ticket. It's always sold out, but it's not like it's Nevada residents that are getting those tickets, right? So the Oakland A's want to relocate to Las Vegas in Major League Baseball. So they're going to play in Sacramento, not as the Sacramento A's, they're just going to call themselves the Athletics until they can hopefully get the municipal deal for the stadium in Vegas, but that's really unclear. So the future of that franchise and its ability to relocate is really a limbo. But so that's where Vegas is a weird anomaly in this, in terms of you wouldn't think with designated market area that they're large enough, but they have so many people coming through, so many tourists that, you know, if you can catch an NFL game, or the NHL team was the first one, right? And then once the Knights came in, then the Raiders came in, and now Vegas is becoming a major league city. So yeah, the Vegas is a really interesting example.
What about the Cosmos? Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
When is that happening? What do you get? Go on, put a number in that.
I certainly can't, right now, I don't see where we fit into this picture. I really don't. But like I said, that day in 2013 where my daughter got to give Pelé a hug on the pitch, you know? And my son was a ball boy. And my wife and I were interviewed on Japanese TV, this crazy, surreal thing. Literally a dream I had so many years. A recurring dream was I'd have to get to the stadium for the Cosmos game. In my wildest dreams, I don't know if it's like pizza right before or whatever, it'd be to play, right? But then usually the dream was to get back as a fan. But it happened. It happened. And I thought it was impossible. For a while, I thought I became a Red Bulls fan, right? I followed the Metro Stars when Major League Soccer started because I thought they were going to become the Cosmos. And I saw some kind of funding. I thought it was just a matter of intellectual property rights. And then when Red Bull bought the Metro Stars, saving the franchise, right? Because the Metro Media, the team that had operator investor rights, they were sick of it. And Phil Anschutz bought it. They were one of a whole portfolio of MLS franchises that Anschutz Entertainment Group owned. So I was kind of relieved when Dietrich Mateschitz and Red Bull bought Metro Stars, and I thought Red Bull was just a placeholder. And they had Pelé and Beckenbauer and Giorgio Quinaglia, and we were on the bench on the first game. So I was, okay, all right, but I thought it was just a placeholder. Beckenbauer's involved. Beckenbauer's involved. It'll be good. We'll be the Cosmos. We'll be the Cosmos. No, I was wrong. I was wrong. So when the Cosmos came back, you know, and I was invited into the front office, and they said, we need a historian. Will you be the historian, or if not, can you find one? And I'm looking at Pelé's truck. I'm looking at the truck. I'm like, well, I'll do it. I'll do it. So is USL a possibility? Maybe somebody who owns a USL franchise in the area would be willing to buy the Cosmos from Rocco, or maybe Rocco would be willing to, right. So, but in terms of a date, it would be at least 5 years away, especially with the appeal right now. Because what's the value of the Cosmos, right? In terms of financial investment, Rocco spent tens of millions of dollars. Right, you saw Major League Soccer offered $5 million. He paid more. Right, they offered $5 million as a kill fee. If you're any writers, you know a kill fee, right? You write an article, but then they don't want to publish it, and they give you the kill fee, right? It was like a kill fee to the club, right? They could have killed us off. $5 million, they don't have to worry about Cosmos ever again. But instead, Rocco bought the team. But what's the value? This was $500 million at stake in this court case. And so it's still $500 million at stake with the appeal. And if we win it and force promotion relegation, and again, that's what's at stake. We weren't even allowed to say those words in court. Objection sustained. Right? But if we can force promotion relegation, then the Cosmos is the most valuable brand in North American sport.
Does anybody else want to question? I have one last question. Does anybody else want to ask a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, the Canadian League has come up, hasn't it, the last
Yeah.
couple of years, which I believe is because of the World Cup. Obviously very small at the moment, but there's teams in it, like Vancouver. Is there any legs in that sort of having a promotion relegation format? And I know you've used North American soccer a lot, but I would imagine it's under a different jurisdiction in Canada.
Yeah, the Canadian FA essentially is more behind that. And again, the ability of Major League Soccer to operate franchises in Canada is something I don't really fully understand. So you've got Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver as Canadian franchises in Major League Soccer. But then you have the Canadian Premier League that has, like Halifax and some other locations like that. I don't know how much time you spent in Canada when you go from one place to, drive from Montreal to Quebec.
Yeah.
There's not too much of it. So how many cities could sustain professional soccer clubs to have, more than 20, if it's at 40, 50, 60, let's have a real promotion relegation system. I know that they've talked about that aspiration.
Could they flip it and have American teams in the Canadian League held under a different legal system? That's what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah, that was something that some people have fantasized about. And also some people have fantasized about even having American teams in Liga MX, not in Mexico. But as you may know, in the last couple of years, Liga MX suspended promotion relegation in Mexico.
There's a lot going on in Europe at the moment. Euroleague basketball, for example, they've gone basically almost completely closed.
Yeah.
And they also flirted with having a team from Dubai in the league.
Yeah.
The team is actually playing in the Adriatic Basketball League at the moment.
Yeah.
Some people feel that this is like a transition.
Yeah.
And a lot of the teams in Euroleague basketball, like Real Madrid, Barcelona, are soccer teams.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of discussions about well, this is a shadow test and all that.
Yeah.
So you could argue that I don't think it's an argument. I think it's a fact that there's a sort of a threat to the European model.
Yes.
Going on here at the moment.
Yeah.
But then in the States, you have the NCAA business, right? You guys taking a case, and it's almost like there are real movements afoot going the opposite direction. But I want to ask you specifically about the NCAA. I mean, if it's a case essentially, if my understanding is correct, with Professor Richard Southall here from South Carolina, last term talking about this. I mean, if it's the case that de facto you're going to be playing your college athletes, yeah. Well, why didn't you just go the whole hog and bring in an equity investor for the college team?
Absolutely.
And then then you have a college soccer system. You obviously start with NBA and NFL.
Yeah.
I mean, is it from the college system where you're going to have the Trojan horse blow the whole promotional relegation thing apart? I don't know.
Yeah. So in terms of the European basketball is a really example of this, where I think the kind of nomenclature we use really makes a difference, right? The idea European model, North American model, really. No, I mean, Simon Chadwick has these other terms of the neoclassical model, the utilitarian model, the sort of geopolitical economy of sport. So I think those terms are probably a little more useful than when we think of it as European versus North American. So I have a lot of friends at IAC Athens, and when you talk to executives there, they're extremely frustrated, feeling handcuffed in terms of basketball. They've got this great tradition at IAC going back to the 1968 European Championship, which they actually had to have it at the football stadium. Massive. I think the largest crowd in professional basketball still, I think, in Europe was IAC's European final in 1968. I could be wrong on that. I don't know my European basketball that well. But at IAC, they're really frustrated by this kind of almost closed model already, where I think it's Olympiacos have that kind of Greek spot right now.
Yeah.
And so I think they're kind of even shifting their attention over to
Well, they don't think of it as a wild card, or if they win the second tier.
Yeah. So what executives at IAC were explaining to me was they see the ROI right now just isn't, the possibility of a return on their investment it's becoming too steep already as if it's closed. And so very, very frustrated, even though they feel that they have. So if you go to the new stadium, Hagia Sophia, they have in the museum there, they have little wing of it dedicated to the other sports, and you see everything they achieved, right? They have the greatest history in Greece for basketball, but they feel blocked out already by what they're calling that North American model. This is, look, it's going to your model as if it's ours to blame. So the NASL lead attorney, Jeffrey Kessler, was the lead attorney in the case against the NCAA. And one of the questions I always like to ask my students is, what are the two biggest attendance cities, or where are the two biggest attendances for basketball in the United States every year? They'll say the Lakers, the Knicks, right? But it's really Syracuse. Syracuse although they had a big drop off this year. I saw just before I left, they've had a big drop off in attendance for the new head coach. But for years, it's been either University of Kansas and Syracuse University have tremendous attendance, far greater than any NBA team. Now, my father was a Syracuse Nationals fan when he was a kid. And they left Syracuse because it wasn't a big enough market, and they relocated to Philadelphia to become the 76ers. So he lost his team as a kid that he cared about. The team he cared about more than any other, the Syracuse Snacks, relocated to Philadelphia. There's your franchise scarcity. There's your relocation, all in a nutshell, right? And I even mentioned about the Sixers and their lack of investment and things, right? But this possibility, when you go to Syracuse, the most popular athlete in town is somebody who only played 1 year at Syracuse University, Carmelo Anthony. You see murals around town. You see his jerseys for sale. And by the way, he's the owner of the Puerto Rico FC team in North American soccer. He traveled with us to Cuba. The Husbands played the Cuban national team. So imagine if Carmelo never needed to leave Syracuse. If his ability to play for the Syracuse team wasn't tied up to registration for 4 to 5 courses each semester, which is so. In other words, the other part of that is the amateurism of ostensibly student athletes, when really they just want to be playing whatever sport that they're for aiming, right? So yeah, I see a real change in all. When I talk about promotion relegation, I just don't want it for I don't just want it for the sport that I care about the most. I want it for all, right? I want to be able to see Notre Dame play the Bears. I want to be able to see the University of Pittsburgh play the Steelers.
Okay, well, look, we've gone on to nearly 8 o'clock, and I want to thank you for a terrific presentation. And particularly the moving stuff, I know a little bit about legal matters. I don't think everything working for mentioned it's close in all my life. And the thanks for all you guys who come along. The thanks for the guys who are online. And it's a pleasure to have you as always.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Six.